Hello and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, Mmmm, and today we have Lorena Creole with us. How are you today, Lorena?
I am doing great. I'm doing wonderful and so glad to be on your channel. This is exciting.
Well, thank you for being here. I always love when you come on my channel, and we always have such a great time. So this is very exciting. We are going to be talking about the documentary that Matt Walsh has completed, and he's actually also completed a book called "What Is a Woman." And I just found it so intriguing that he would do this. And I do just want to say hello to some of the people who are also in the chat with us today. We have Tom Jr. Jackson,
Hi, Tom Jr. Jackson.
and we also have Zacharat 315. Howdy, y'all.
Hello.
And as well as Rocket Man underscore 2001. Greetings to you.
Yes,
Um,
greetings indeed.
yes, it's so nice to see you all here as we're going to be talking about this incredible documentary, Lorena, that I had only just found out, like just per chance that it was even being made. And then on top of that, for Matt Walsh to even write a book on this topic, I was very impressed by what he did. And so, for those of you who are listening and may not know exactly what we're referring to this documentary that was made by Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. And the documentary is an investigative documentary over how people perceive what a woman or how you define a woman. And,
Hmm.
Matt is just an unbelievably effective journalist who, and I have to say, Lorena, I have to give him so much credit for doing something that I'm always talking about, um, or at least something that I always hope other journalists would do, which is to present so many different sides, so many different opinions. So when you're watching something, you're not just getting the opinion of one side. So I have to say that as soon as I realized that this is what Matt was doing, and it was
Hmm.
not easy, this was not an easy documentary for Matt, I'm sure, to take on, nor was it easy for him to solicit individuals to interview to do this documentary. But I
Hmm.
sure am glad he did. Lorena, what did you heard about the documentary before you watched it?
Um, I hadn't heard of it at all. For some reason, it had just flown under my radar. And I want to say maybe about a week ago, um, I'm like going through Twitter and I don't remember who retweeted it, but it was a clip and it said, basically, we asked these tribesmen, what is a woman? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let's see, what they have to say. And it was the one of the most base things I had ever heard. It was, I mean, when he's asking the questions like, so what is a woman? And you can see they're looking just like, we're being polite, but that really is a dumbass question that you just asked. And then he's like, well, do you have any transgender? And it's just like, uh, what is that? And he's explaining, when man wants to change and become a woman and vice versa. And they're looking at just like, and the guy's translating and he just kind of looks like, I'm sorry, this is what he's asking, you guys. And it just got funnier and funnier just how common sense the answers were, and it was so funny. I think I sent it to the dark council because I'm like, y'all just got to look at this. You really do. And I hadn't heard of it, so when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is something that I definitely want to check out because like, what is woman? And it just seems like more and more they're trying, let's say society at large is trying to change that definition. And we already know about the war on femininity in popular culture and in Hollywood. So to kind of see a country that's removed outside of ours give such a common sense answer, just the I guess just the I don't want to say it's not absurdity. It's another word I can't freaking remember. Just the contrast of it was just astounding. So I was like, okay, I have to check this out. And I'm glad you did. So I'm glad you invited me on to talk about it.
Well, it seemed to make sense because you and I do address certain issues about the importance of men and, toxic males or toxic male appreciation. And of
Mhm.
course, we both are on a show called Toxic Femininity. And I
Mhm.
thought that it would seem to make sense to kind of look at this particular documentary and the scene that you are talking about. I thought that Matt was very brave to bring in that group because oftentimes they're kind of ignored.
Mhm.
A lot of times they'll be part of some kind of anthropological study, and no one will ever read that paper or book
Mhm.
that report would be in. But we got to see them in person. They know the rest of the world has electronics. They are aware that the rest of the world does live a little differently from the way they do. And yet they've
Mhm.
managed to hold on to their values and their way of life, which you could clearly see in that clip where Matt is speaking to that tribe. And I thought
Mhm.
that it was very sensitive of him and very, honestly, it's very inclusive of him to even consider cultures, regardless of location and background, in this documentary, which isn't something we always see. I think a lot of documentaries that are made nowadays are probably from more of let's say United States point of view, is aren't
Mhm.
they? Where everything is United States focused,
Right.
and this one felt like he wanted to kind of go to different places and understand a worldview of what people think a woman is or what they perceive womanhood to be. And I'm going to say womanhood for me, Lorena, because you and I are both women.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
and our perception of being a woman is going to be very different, I think, when how men you know see womanhood. They can't understand that, or we'll describe it, but we're going to describe it differently because women and men are different in I don't see that we're the same, but I can say that I can't live without men in my life. So so I do have to say
Agreed.
that. But
Agreed.
there are differences, and I think that um, Matt was a bit provocative in the sense of taking on the weight of trying to not only interview these different groups um, in a critical manner, but also trying
Mhm.
to understand their reasoning process. And when I say that, I noticed that a lot of times when he was talking in the documentary, Lorena, it's very gutsy of him to say, well, okay, if I say this is a cat, could you say it's something else? And, it was kind of like just simple reasoning that any other person would say, yeah, it's a cat. You're right, it's a cat. But there seemed to be pushback even on the simplest of debates or topics. What do you
Mhm.
think about that becoming a repetitive theme from some of the interviewed individuals in this documentary?
Let's see. This is kind of like an exaggeration, but the saying goes, if you repeat a lie enough, it becomes a truth. So for some of the people who were interviewed, for some of them, they are so invested into this idea of gender being, a social construct, and they're so invested in that they really can't handle, for the most part, having that question. It's like someone who says, I don't know, we'll use like a football analogy. Someone who's like a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I can't freaking stand the Dallas Cowboys at all. At all. Diehard fans be like, I don't want to hear anything. No, 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 no. I don't want to hear anything, about it, because they do not want their worldview shaken. Some people are comfortable being in that bubble, and when that comfort gets disturbed and they don't know how to handle it, they push back. And we saw this throughout throughout the whole documentary, even to the point where the one gender studies professor, He was answering Matt's questions with a question. I'm like, I can't. No, no, that's not that. Well, how would you define it? And it's like that's not an answer. And it's just like, what is so threatening about the truth? And perhaps it is that the truth shakes, their worldview. The truth is like looking behind the curtain from the Wizard of Oz, like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, or, the emperor has no clothes. And, the kid is the brave one who says, emperor has no clothes on. But I think it's just that truth is something they're not comfortable with. And that truth exposes that what they've bought into is really not true at all.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I do want to say hello to Cool Gamer, who is also here. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Cool Gamer. Thank you
Thank
for joining
you.
us
Yes.
today. And Denise Gamer. Wow, we got some gamers going on in here. Hey, ladies. Oh, what? No, I say that? You sure can say hello,
Yes, you can
ladies.
say that. You can say that.
And Rockite Man 2001 says, uh, I was married for 30 years. I figured out what a woman is rather quickly. Absolutely, you sure did,
I'll
didn't
bet.
you? God
I'll
bless you
bet.
for that.
Real fast.
And Dennis Mason. Dennis Mason is also here with us today. And hello to you. I guess there was one more chat earlier, but I just did want to say hi to you as well, Dennis Mason. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Reina and
Yes.
I are talking about the Matt Walsh documentary, What is a
Mhm.
Woman? And, there was a lot. Uh, Matt Walsh packed a lot into this documentary, didn't he?
He really did.
I think that he could have gotten away with less, but it was so thorough. And this clearly took him over a year, I'm sure, or more to complete with the level of professionalism in it. And hello to
Mhm.
you, Dylan Campbell.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us here. So, one of the first topics that they do talk about is,
Mhm.
you know, in addition to defining what a woman is, we do hear about surgery, and this is a time and an era right now, Lorena, where we're probably seeing and hearing more about gender reassignment surgery than we've
Mhm.
ever heard in our lives. And I remember watching movies where someone wanted to actually get a sex change, but they couldn't. And, this kind of experience of that individual. But now we're in an era where it really is a little different. And I think that it was interesting how a number of people, when they were asked the question about what a woman was, they couldn't describe it. They just couldn't give an answer. For me, a woman is someone who is actually genetically female and, is
Mhm.
a woman. So, I consider myself a woman. I'm genetically a woman, biologically a woman. I happen to be a biologist. So I'm not going to go down the road of telling anyone
Ah.
they're right or wrong. I'm not going to tell anyone that. What I am going to say is that I'm glad that people are, kind of putting it out there what their thoughts are and what's important to them and how they would describe a woman. So, how would
Mhm.
you, if you had to, you don't have to answer that question, Lorena.
Mhm.
How would you describe a woman? What is a woman to you?
Well, to quote Matt Walsh's wife at the end, a woman is an adult female.
Mhm.
Um, that's pretty much it in a nutshell for me. And of course, I know I talk about this on my channel and kind of in other chats. One of the things that I've been doing to trace my family is doing DNA testing. So when I DNA test people or they take DNA tests, when those markers come back, they will tell you if someone is male or if someone is female. Now, Ancestry DNA recently did some kind of software update where they could basically tell you which ethnicity belongs to which side of your family. I have not DNA tested my mother. I have not DNA tested my father. However, they could find out in my DNA and split which came from my father and which came from my mother. And those binary results tell you what comes from a male and what comes from a female. So for me personally, a woman is an adult biological female. If you spit for a DNA test and the markers come back as a double X, you are a woman. If it comes back as an X and Y, you are a man.
I agree with that 100%. John Ware Jr. also has an interesting take on this. Hello, John Ware Jr. Google defines a woman is an adult female human being. I agree with that definition as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if we're really looking at this from a realistic point of view and from what studies have shown us, what research studies actually support is that that's what the majority of the world believes versus specific groups per se.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why Matt went overseas into different countries to get
Mm-hmm.
those explanations and
Mm-hmm.
sentiments of people. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that sentiment. I think that it's a healthy opinion and, point of view to
It
have.
is. It is. It's very realistic and it's interesting. And I almost want to say there's kind of like a method to his madness, so to speak. Why he specifically went to visit the Maasai tribe in Kenya. When I was a kid and I would read National Geographic magazines, one of the most photographed regions in Africa is the Maasai tribe. Why? Because of their traditions, their bright costumes, their ceremonies. Everyone is used to seeing is, well, I won't say everyone, but pretty much the world is familiar with that region because of the Maasai, and one because they're so tall, and two that's the region where they recruit a lot of NBA basketball players from. But with the internet being one of the best things to connect with third world countries and regions like that has been the internet. So someone who's on Facebook in the US can easily communicate with someone who's on Facebook on say South Sudan, like Peru. It's the connection is there, and I really think that it's very smart of him to do that, because people aren't going to look and say, oh well, that's a super exotic reason. Several people are going to be like, yeah, I know so and so on Facebook from there, or I've heard of that particular tribe. So I thought that that was very smart of him to pick them, because if you go back and you read things and learn about their culture, especially in Africa, there's very distinct female roles and male roles. And to bring it even closer to the United States, we'll say in the Caribbean, especially, even there are some things that are very traditionally male and some things are very traditionally female. And if you try to cross those two, you will get looked at very, 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 strangely.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a lot of cultural significance to these roles in culture and in our own, which it clearly is because we do have specific roles that we all are in, and
Hmm.
we can't escape that. That's not a fantasy. These roles do exist. And I think Matt, while one thing that I noticed that he does seem to get a little frustrated a little bit at some point in the documentary. Um,
I could feel him too, because it was it was frustrating me too. I'm just like, can you give a straight answer when it would kill you to give a straight answer instead of asking either a question in response to a question, or pretty much just in silence, or deciding what to say till finally saying, okay, well, this interview is over, because you don't want to answer the
yes,
question.
I was disappointed to see that happen time and time again. And, honestly, especially for academics, that's very childish. You're
Hmm.
accustomed to having people challenge your views all the time, guys. Imagine going into work every day and you're constantly being questioned about your views. That's academia, or at least a strong academic department. Because
Hmm.
you don't want to be in an academic department that it's an echo chamber where you're not being challenged for your views. But we have seen a number of philosophers, philosophy professors, talking about how the idea of philosophy and challenging ideas is dying. And if you can't handle, let's say maybe Matt set up an hour interview for them. If you can't handle an
Mhm.
hour interview off of something that you believe in so passionately,
Mhm.
I question the conviction of certain individuals, and it's okay for them to disagree with Matt Walsh. It's really no rule that they can't disagree with him,
Exactly.
but to walk away on something that is actually very important. And Lorena, you and I have so much to talk about this. um, Rocket Man 2001 says nobody can define what a woman is, and Pluto is no longer a planet. The future sucks.
Oh, they decided to not for it to not be a planet again. They always like flip. It's a planet. Guess what? No, no, it's not a planet.
And Stig Kenobi,
Hey,
hello to
Steve.
you.
Seeing
Swinging by to say
you.
hello before bed. Hope everyone is doing well. Thank you so much,
Doing
Stig.
great.
So kind of
Yes.
you.
Thank
And
you.
John Ware Jr. says in an interview with Steve Deese today, he
Hmm.
said he, assuming Steve Walsh, went to the tribe because certain ideologues considered gender a Western colonial construct, and the tribe wasn't influenced by Westerners. So,
That's yeah, that's a good point. And because speaking of Westerners, y'all know it's like I watch a extreme amount of anime. Um, but the gender roles there also are very, very distinct. Not in somewhat influenced by the way, not really a little bit, but in general, it's Eastern, and those roles are very, very distinct to the point where, if I remember correctly, and you watched Shogun, right?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
where he's trying to learn Japanese, right?
yes,
And the love interest, I can't believe I'm blanking her name, is teaching him Japanese.
yes,
And when he
yes.
goes to speak to the men in Japanese, they just start laughing. And it's just like, why? It's like you talk like you speak Japanese like a woman because there's a certain dialect
Right.
of Japanese that is spoken, by women. And again, no Western influence. Well, it's creeping in there, but still way more distinct difference than here in the West.
Yeah, and that's good to note. And of course, that is very cultural, um, and something that their society developed over time and
Mhm.
incredibly important in the way that they communicate with one another. So much so that it stood out, Lorena. I remember what karimaska. That's what I remember from that because that's how, I guess maybe that's how they would say hello or some a greeting of some kind. And it stuck with me, Lorena. This is, I don't know how many years ago, the 80s, right? It was in the
Mhm.
80s.
Think so, yeah.
So honestly, I think it's very interesting when we're looking at roles that way. And thank you, Tom Jr. Jackson. It's the Streamyard
Ooh,
guys. If you would like to make a donation to Positive Fandom, and
yes.
also please subscribe to Lorena's channel as well. We put the link up there as well, guys.
Oh, well, thank
Um,
you.
and so, Lorena, one other thing that I think is very interesting that this show is doing, or let's say this documentary, is that it seems like what's important to Matt is not whether or not you share his views. What's
Mhm.
important after seeing this documentary to me is that you have as much information as possible to make a decision on your own, being well informed. And isn't
Mhm.
it funny, Lorena, that it doesn't seem like there's anything, any kind of resource guide or anything out there that's really informing this. Rather, we're getting a situation where we're being told rather than being informed. What do you think?
Mhm. No, I wholeheartedly agree with you, especially with the information that Matt puts out in this documentary. Like, Kinsey, I knew of him, but didn't know all that he was involved in with just, um, sexual experimentation experiments being done on like small children, and that was never advertised, at least as far as I knew. It was just, Kinsey and the sexual revolution and studying of, sexual activity of, adults in the United States, but never that connection, and the connection to the other doctor who also performed some really.
Money, is it Money is the name?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, that was his name, and just the experiments that he ran, especially, it was like a pair of brothers, and, one, accidentally was unfortunately mutilated in a circumcision accident, but used that as an excuse to perform certain experiments. And long story short, one of the brothers who was actually on Oprah, I saw that. There was like an interview that she did with him, that he had tried to transition to a girl, but was just couldn't deal with it and went back to being a male. And I forget, one of the brothers died of an overdose, and the other one died, unfortunately, self-inflicted, because of that. They don't. None of that was told. None of it was told about. They talk about puberty blockers, and when you hear it, it sounds innocuous. Oh, we'll just give them puberty blockers. Come to find out that the pharmaceutical company that provides that's actually something that's used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
Mhm.
And that pharmaceutical company was sued for, I think, $800 million or some kind of judgment, that they won. And I just couldn't believe how casually that one doctor was just talking about puberty blockers, like, oh, we just put a pause on it. And another person that they interviewed, who was born female, had the surgery to become male, and had just all kinds of problems, and was saying, this is basically mutilating your children, and just do not let them undergo that. And Matt asked, oh, is puberty blockers, does that just block puberty? He said, no, doesn't do that at all. And it's interesting that, just like, because he's very good about putting this information out there that you don't see, because in the mainstream press, they talk about it as if it's no big deal, you know, gender assignment surgery, no big deal, just fund it. And it's great because it's more important, to do this gender affirming surgery. But no one talks about the human cost that's involved. And that's the one thing that I really like what Matt kept in mind with this documentary, is the human cost of what's going on, especially when it comes to our children.
Yeah, absolutely. And that particular, today when you are doing a research study and human beings are involved, you have to create a proposal and send it to something called an institutional review board. It's called an IRB. And they want to know exactly what you're doing in your research study. And there are
Mhm.
specific things that if they find to be unethical, they will not approve your research study. So, whatever institution that you are at, whatever university, or it doesn't have to be a university, it could be another place as well. But usually there's
Mhm.
a group of individuals who will look and say, well, this is not, we don't think you should do this research. Can you change this? And that would make it a research study that maintains ethical standards. But I
Mhm.
don't believe that there was an IRB when a lot of these, researchers like Kinsey and Money were doing their research. I could be wrong, but I suspect that it didn't exist at that time. And
Mhm.
that particular, those group of twins in academia are famous because they're one of the cases, like maybe about 100 cases in the area of psychology, because I think the research study that I had heard about them was in psychology, because they're like when you're studying psychology, or that's your major, or you're doing graduate work in psychology, there's about a
Mhm.
hundred specific cases that are very important to memorize, and that's one of them. And the idea behind it was that, could you actually change someone's gender? That was what the approach was. But
Mm.
it's actually a lot more in the way that you described it, Lorraine, because we already know that these two unfortunate twins were abused in the study
Yeah,
in different
definitely.
ways in addition to that. But
Mhm.
the idea that it could just be done, by at a very young age specifically, in
Mhm.
infancy or however old they were when this accident that happened, because he became genitally mutilated. So they said, okay, we'll just make him a girl. Now,
Mhm.
that is a very extreme decision to do. This is a time where he was not going to be able to have reconstructive surgery or anything like that. So it was a desperate situation. And unfortunately, those twins fell victim to this. But
Mhm.
I think it's an excellent example because it's a well known study, let's say, for doctors, for researchers, the kind of people who would be advising a family member or a loved one about what to do in a situation involving their children. And
Mhm.
so this is another example of Matt just really looking very specifically to see if there's a history of any kind of um,
Mhm.
examples where this can have adverse effects. And so, you and I are not necessarily saying a person shouldn't do this. What we're saying is you want to know all the facts before you get into this. And
Exactly. You
the
want
world
to
that
know, oh, I'm sorry. It's like,
no,
you
it
you
seems like
want you want to know the risks, you know?
yes, yes. And I think that a person who's presented with the risks and makes that decision independently is one thing, versus what we're kind of seeing. It's very casual. It feels like it's being treated in a very casual manner. And for
Mhm.
me, any medical procedure isn't something that I think anybody should take as casually as what we're seeing happening in at least from what I am gathering. And um, the other kind of really interesting thing too, when we're talking about this, is you mentioned how there were different researchers who were in this
Mhm.
discussion. Some of them more amicable than others. Some of them somewhat defensive, and
Mhm.
some of them who were doubling down. um, we didn't get any person who said, yeah, well, maybe you're right about that. And a lot of times in these documentaries, someone might kind of throw that out. They'll throw you a
Mhm.
bone. But we didn't see that as an example. But we also witnessed it from individuals who were not, let's say, in the research or medical professions, individuals on the street who feel quite frustrated and almost confused themselves as to how to answer these questions. And
Mhm.
I would like to think that after seeing this documentary, the confusion is because what they've been told in the past isn't anything that's really helped them make a decision like this. But you had mentioned children now, and then this was something that leads
Mhm.
right into what you were talking about, Lorena. Children undergoing transformations in this way. Um, I have to say it was sad to hear the story of that father who had a child, and that child, I guess, was the father was getting arrested because he either
Oh, the
refused.
one in Canada?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. I think if there's anybody who's going to advocate for you as a minor, it's going to be your
Mhm.
parents, and you can still get that kind of surgery later on. um, I think it's unfortunate that they felt that they had to intervene, for a minor. But it also is telling us, Lorena, that parents don't have rights over their own children. What do you? I mean, how do you interpret it? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm like, where do I s where do I'm like, where do I start, when it comes to this? I'm just a big advocate in general of protecting your children. Like, I have young nieces and young nephews. They are like the most vulnerable, among us. So I really don't like it. Like, say, for example, my niece had to go like get a just your standard vaccinations, so she could go, so she could go to camp. And I'm like asking questions about, what the vaccine and what all the risks are and where did they get it, and and all of that, because even though I know the benefits outweigh any possible side effects, you want to be well informed. But this is done in order to protect them. When you're talking about things like puberty blockers, gender reassignment surgery, all of that, when they're that young and they're growing, they're young and they're depending on you, and they're not mature enough to make a decision like that. I mean, when we were growing up, they would tell you stuff, don't do drugs, it'll stunt your growth. Don't do this, it'll stunt your growth. You're a growing person, your brain's growing, you have to take care of your body. So now they're prescribing these things that are not so good, for your body. And you're making choices for these children that are not beneficial, and it's something that they need to have a say in. Not then, once you're 18 and turn to adult, that's perfectly fine, but these are children, and you don't know what the side effects are going to be, how they're going to be, affected. And one of the things that one of the therapists did bring up, I believe it's a therapist, was talking about, when children are going through puberty, it is a very, very difficult time. Anyone who tells you that puberty was no big deal, they're lying to you. They really, they really are, because you're going from what you know as a kid to transitioning into being an adult. And it's scary being forcibly pushed away from what you knew to something different. It's like you're awkward, you don't know if you're normal. Somebody has zits, somebody else doesn't. Somebody had a growth spurt, somebody's still short, and it's a very awkward and vulnerable, point in time. And it's something that, you usually get through with the help of your parents, with the help of like your core group of, of friends. But again, part of it also having to do with social media, that community out there where it's like, oh, were you depressed? Well, it might be because you identify with the wrong gender. And that's very real and very, oh, yeah, yeah. And that's something that they brought up also in the documentary about the power of these online communities. It used to be kind of like, there's groups for depression, there's groups for anxiety, there's just groups for everything, but it was more of like around interests and around support groups. So now that's evolved to, there's one for transgenderism, there's one for if I identify as a deer, there's one for if I don't know which one that I am, so I'm going to kind of be non-binary, whatever, and it all feeds into that. And that's out there. And unfortunately, kids who have access to a lot of social media get into that, and it really does skew, their worldview. And some people just don't realize how much social media has a hold of our kids. I'm so glad social media was not around. When I was a kid, I would have to go to people's houses and kick their ass for stuff that they would say. But like my niece will be like, "Oh, look, there's this girl. She's on TikTok, and she's like, she's so much prettier than me." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Look, she has all of this and all of that." And I'm just like, "You don't know how she got that, or if that's even hers." I said, "How do you
Mhm.
know she didn't go to Walmart, put the
Mhm.
clothes on in the dressing room, take pictures on the store floor, and hang them back up?" And she's looking. I'm just like, "Yeah, there's people."
Haven't you ever heard of internet pretty? That's like
Mhm. That is
catfishing.
that is extremely, that's extremely real, but they see what's projected out there in the internet and they think that it's reality
Mhm.
when it's really not. That was a
It is.
roundabout answer, but
No, no, it's perfect. It's a very direct answer because a lot of it is relevant to what we're talking about. Actually, everything that you said is relevant to what we're talking about, and there is just so much to talk about with this documentary. And hello to Darth Plato. Hope you are well uh, tonight. And hello to Evil Face Bad. Says that the twins thing was featured on Law and Order SVU.
really?
I didn't know that. Um, and we have Charlie the unicorn. Hello,
That
Charlie.
cute AVI there, I like that.
Isn't it great? He says, Art. I love you too, Charlie. Lugnut6.
Hello, my dear.
Hi. He says, if you need any definition as to what is a woman, here's some examples. Lorena. Mandy, Nina Infinity, Eris, Mary Mayhem, among others. Brains, beauty, guts, success, style, class, and much more. Well,
Oh,
thank
thank
you so
you.
much, Lugnut6. That is so kind of you, and we
Yes.
definitely appreciate those kind words. Thank you for
Mm.
everybody who's out there listening to our discussion. Um, and the other thing that I was going to say is, I question the idea, or at least the approach of the responsibility of telling someone what's wrong with them. In other words,
Mm.
doctors have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility to do that. But online, it could be anybody that you're talking to. You don't necessarily know if you're seeing a professional. And we have seen actually professional therapists and doctors in this video, in the
Mhm.
documentary, who
Absolutely.
have quite varying opinions about defining what may be an issue, what may not be an issue.
Mhm.
It's very hard to figure out, or at least for a parent to be faced with this situation and then have professionals where they might be at a clinic that just does that only, and you're
Mhm.
going there. It's very hard to imagine that parents are getting an objective view for something that really is, I think, uh, can be overwhelming. And Darth Plato says the problem here is relativism. People are rejecting that the world is knowledgeable and discoverable, and
Mhm.
instead being taught that the world is whatever you think it is, including your identity. Wow, those are very profound words.
Very much so, because you notice a theme that was commonly, repeated in this was, "Well, it's what you think it is." It's, "Well, who am I to judge? It's probably whatever whatever you think it is." And it's kind of like it's really that's really not it, but just this whole thing of just whatever you conceive that it is, instead of, no, what is the concrete and indisputable truth going on, and you're right, it's like we've gotten away from that.
Yeah, and Darth Plato goes on to say that relativism is why people freak out and become defensive when
Mhm,
you question the assertions. And honestly, Lorena, if let's say they were confronted by Matt, well, they were, let's say hypothetically in a
mhm,
particular question, and Matt says, well, then such and such and such and such. And let's say they did agree and say, but for me, this problem is more complex than that.
mhm,
And I think that that would be something that could be arguable, or something that a person could say, well, this is this person's
mhm,
a situation, and it is more complex, and perhaps it's their private situation.
mhm,
But a lot of what Matt has been focusing on has been this collective view of
mhm.
a certain group of people that is actually being forced on all. For example, we saw the doctor who had that book that was for 10-year-olds.
Oh my god. I I couldn't believe that when, when I saw it, and it was extremely shocking, and I'm kinda glad that the page that Matt opened up to was exactly what it opened up to, because 'cause you're thinking, a book for 10-year-olds, they're probably talking about, well, your body will eventually start to change, and this'll happen, and that'll happen, not getting extremely graphic, but kind of like in a funny, haha kind of way to kind of alleviate, the tension or anxiety, just something very cartoonish. I didn't expect for when the page was opened, you basically see 2 people doing, I guess, the reverse cowgirl or something like that.
It was a sexual act. There was no reason
Yes,
for two young adults to be naked in that kind of,
and
it
a
was essentially
very
pornography, drawn out pornography.
exactly, a very, very flagrant pornographic drawing.
And what it said was that this is normal, or something like
Yes,
that. And I'm thinking to myself, something, for minors, this is not normal for them to be doing stuff like that.
that
Or
is
10-year-olds. 10-year-olds aren't engaging in stuff like that.
no.
So I don't understand how that has become, the justification of describing it that way. That's not anything 10-year-olds should be doing.
No, I think it's something that they push onto them. There seems to be this push to make children grow up faster than they need to. There used to be this thing of like, oh, so and so went and found his dad's Playboy magazines or something like that. But that was like, okay, that's not something that you were supposed to find and not something that you were supposed to know about. And with 10-year-olds, they can't really process something like that. It is a form, literally, I will say, literally a form of sexual abuse in a way,
Mhm.
because when I had to take like mandated reporter training, because when I was a fitness instructor, I was at a gym where they had children's programs, so you had to take this. And one of the things that you had to look out for were signs of sexual abuse, and one of those signs is when children are describing very sexual things that they should have zero knowledge of in detail. That's usually something that's very, very suspect. So exposing them to something like this, I mean, just blatant and flagrant. It really is. It's a form of abuse, and there is no reason why a book like that should have been presented to 10-year-olds. And the look on the one doctor's face, because she was appalled.
She was.
She was extremely appalled uh, when she brought that out there.
Yeah, and I think that this is another example of, and I'm glad that this information is getting out to people so that they're just aware of what's being shown to their children,
Hmm.
or even, let's say, has been chosen by an educator to be shown to their children. I think that there's a lot of questions that parents will have to ask, because this type of literature wasn't something that was the norm when you and I were growing up. This didn't even exist.
No.
So they mentioned that a lot of these ideas and approaches are being taught in sexual education classes for children. I mean, that's very concerning that it is out there now. And it would certainly explain a lot of the confusion, as far as I'm concerned, with
Hmm.
complex ideas for minds that are not ready for that. So, and we have another person who's joining us, late night alum.
Hello.
Hello, hello,
Hello
late night.
there.
And Charlie the Unicorn says the human condition is complicated. Modern society finally has some words to describe different genders or beings who exist. I'm talking about adults, not children. And Lorena, I have to say that I had no idea that children were kind of getting involved in this to this extent. Um, I had always associated all of this happening to
Hmm.
adults. And, I have to say that it's an adult's decision to do what they want to do with their own body. I firmly believe that.
And I
Right.
agree.
Yeah. But I really was taken back by what the, we didn't get exact numbers, but I really was shocked
Hmm.
by what the documentary implied. And I'm sorry, Matt Walsh, if I'm not getting this part correctly reporting here, but it
Hmm.
seemed to imply that these types of options for minors, it's
Hmm.
becoming more and more available to more and more children. I just think it's a really bad idea for a number of reasons, because they're almost putting some of the responsibility as if it was the child's decision, and that the child's decision overrules anyone else's concerns for the health of the child. So that's something that I am really saddened to see. Something that would never have been considered for a minor, but it seems to be the case. And I have seen a few television shows where
Hmm.
there are some minors who are transitioning from one gender to another. And it is
Hmm.
actually very hard to watch, only because they're still growing.
And that's what it is. As a matter of fact, and you're right. It's like when it comes to adults, it's like you're an adult. You want to go ahead and do that, you go ahead and do that. I just advise you to, learn the risks before you do that. But when you're talking about children who aren't emotionally mature, who really do not know how really to take care of their own health. That's a different story. Even before, like, say, Libs of TikTok is doing God's work, I'll tell you that much, because they have been putting a lot of this stuff, out there for how they're marketing to kids. Now, TLC has this show, and I remember when it first started, it was very controversial, called I Am Jazz. And
Yes.
it was about this young boy transitioning to be a girl. And that was, I'm just like, but really? And she was a teenager. But now you're seeing all this information out here where they're projecting this as normal with young children. Like Matt was saying, kids who, believe in Santa Claus, kids who think that the cartoons on television are actually real. Kids who someday, one thinks that they're a dog, the next day they think that, there's something else. They're not, their little minds are still forming and learning, but yet you want to drop this very adult and very dangerous situation on them. Like the case in point with the man in Canada, I think he was trying to prevent his partner or ex-wife, I don't know, a strange partner, from not putting his daughter on puberty blockers. And the Canadian government had him arrested. Well, yeah, had him arrested for that, for misgendering. Actually called his daughter she instead of he or something like that. Yeah, it makes zero sense. But I think the reason why they're doing this, children are sponges. They are absolute sponges, and they will soak up all kinds of information, bad or like good. For example, playing, Lego Star Wars with my nephew. Instead of lightsaber, he said poop saber and thought it was funny and kept saying it the whole entire time. He's playing. They absorb all of this. They're just sponges. So when you're introducing, the reason that they're introducing this stuff to the children earlier and earlier and earlier is that they just suck that information and they're not pushing back. When you're talking to like teenagers or older teenagers, you're like, what do you freaking think you're talking about? They're more apt to push back. But little kids, they look up to adults and they really don't have the facility to push back, and that's why the other parents are there to protect them. But if you have parents who are more concerned with being their child's friend, and their child saying, well, maybe I think I'm a boy, maybe I think I'm a girl, they're, instead of being the parent instead, and protecting their child. And that's just what's the most devastating, because children are precious, and as far as I'm concerned, the lowest life form in the world is the ones that will not protect a child that's in their charge. It's horrible. And I just seeing it in in this documentary, it's just like, how can you just be okay with doing that, to
And
a
there
child?
and hello, Joker Voice. Joker Voice says, "Hey, ladies, Positive Fandom and
Hello,
Lorena
my dear.
and chat. So nice to see you, Joker Voice." And
Yes.
S Beam is also here. Hello, S Beam. Thank
Hello.
you so much for joining the
Yeah.
chat and tonight's uh,
Mhm.
show here. And and Scotty R37. Oh my goodness. Hi,
Hello.
Scotty. Wow. Hi. I just was not expecting to see you. Hi, Scotty. Nice to see you.
Oh, and there's like over 20 of you guys in here watching, so hit that like button, please. Thank
Yes,
you.
everybody, thank you so much, certainly for being here. Um, something that I noticed that I have been seeing as a justification to override what you and I were referring to in regards to protecting these children
Mhm.
is that some of the justification is, well, this child says that they're going to kill themselves unless they have gender reassignment surgery, and that's kind of a threat. I think that children say many different types of things
I'm
to
gonna
their
run
parents.
away. I hate you. I wish you weren't my mom.
Yes, and I think that as a parent, um, there's such a thing as having a realistic interpretation of your child's health and well-being.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
don't think a threat of I'm going to kill myself if we don't go and do this is uh, an answer that justifies getting that done. There is a compromise that can be done when you turn 18.
Mhm.
You may choose to do certain things, but as of
Mhm.
right now, until things are more even just safer physically for individuals, and we
Mhm.
know more, then perhaps that's a consideration. But
Mhm.
18 really should be where people are making those kinds of decisions for themselves, and children should be protected. And I think that when someone justifies suicide versus a sex change, I think there's a deeper problem.
I
um,
agree. It's a deeper problem, and I also think that it's a cop out as well. To say something that extreme, like, oh, if I don't get gender transforming, surgery, I'm going to kill myself. Usually, a threat like that isn't over something like that. It's, my boyfriend cheated on me, or I lost a game, or something like that. But that's usually very, very serious that a child would do that. You wouldn't be giving them gender reassignment surgery. You would be hauling them to a therapist very, very quickly. I think that that's hyperbole, and they go to extremes to try to scare parents, like, oh, if you don't do this, your child's going to say, oh, well, my only alternative, is to go and yeet myself. No, it isn't. The alternative is sitting down with your child, because that says that there's a mental health issue that's going on, and you really need to get to the bottom of it. And getting to the bottom of it isn't, giving into gender reassignment surgery. I think that's just as much hyperbole as the example of the young girl. I believe she was like I think she was in track and field, I believe. And she had to compete with transgender women. And she was just talking about how literally every race that they would run, soon as the starter pistol goes off, these transgender women or girls are way ahead of her, because they're biologically men.
yes, there's a
Men
physical difference between men and
There
women.
is an absolute physical difference. I had to take ergonomics, and one of the first things that we learned was that men have a 30% higher upper body strength. That's just how it is. That's biological. You cannot get, around that. So the playing field isn't level. And to think that, athletes, especially if you're a student athlete, and you're thinking, my way to get paid, my way to get through college is I get an athletic scholarship. So you're getting working on your body, working on your form. Like she was saying, we're doing all of this to train just to shave milliseconds off of our time. And, they're just getting blown out of the water, and how unfair it is. So when Matt brings it up to this transgender activist, the excuse you hear is, well, there are other transgender girls in sports, and I don't think that they're a threat. These two just happen to be very good. And I'm just like, one, you minimize how these biological girls feel about, a field where they thought that they were competing with other girls. That's level. No, they're not. And they're losing out because of that. So it's like, first you minimize that, then, try to gaslight, Matt, and say, well, that's not really, what's going on. I do believe that they just go to extremes to try to justify it, and to try to shame you for even bringing that up in the first place.
Absolutely. And Rockite Man 2001 says, positive fandom since you're a biologist. Anyone younger than mid 20s, their bodies are still forming. Absolutely. How can extensive surgery like this stuff be justified? And I agree 100% with you. In addition to that threat, which we heard it in this documentary, of them saying that suicide, they said that the children would be saying that they felt that they were going to kill themselves. And
Mhm.
absolutely, in regards to I think it was Charlie the Unicorn talking about suicide and suicide prevention, and it is a concern, but that's a separate issue. And surgery is not going to prevent someone from committing suicide, guys.
No.
It doesn't work like that. I think that those types of comments are calls for help, and if you are in a state like that, you should not be having gender reassignment surgery. It should be for someone who is in a mental state that's healthy, not suicidal, guys. I don't know any doctor who would ethically. In fact, nowadays, Lorena, when you go to the hospital, whether it's even
Mhm.
for a routine checkup or for an emergency room, they'll say, "Do you have you ever thought about committing suicide?" It's
Mhm.
just a common question now, and if you say yes, they stop everything and bring in somebody to talk to you. They won't
Mhm.
continue unless it's urgent care with what's going on until they can find the root of the problem, whether a patient was trying to hurt themselves.
Mhm.
It supersedes a lot of things. And,
Mhm.
the idea that putting in that type of surgery, which is so extreme, it shouldn't even be attempted. Joker Voice says what makes this so important is it exposes this far left movement's true and insidious motive. They need children, especially your children, because they will die out without a new generation. And Joker Voice, I'm going to go even further and say Congress needs it. So for me, I don't separate,
I
you know,
agree.
this is a whole pot of individuals who have a lot invested in this. A lot of investors are invested in this. And that's what I got
Yes.
from this particular documentary is that it wasn't one group or another. There's clearly a public interest. There's some kind of gain, some kind of monetary gain of individuals who are invested in these companies. And guess
Mhm.
what? I bet you if you look at anybody's portfolio or a lot of these people who are in our government, that you will find that many of them have the same investments as they go to lunch together.
Oh, yeah, that's why,
And their children are married to one another,
and they
regardless of
know
party affiliations.
exactly, and it's just what I tell people. I said it's not, they used to say far left. It's not just far left. What's known as the far left is actually the progressives, and they are on both sides of
Mhm.
like the aisle. It's like left side of crazy and right side of crazier, and they're in cahoots together because gender reassignment surgery is it's not cheap. And think of the drugs that they use. The pharmaceutical industry has a crazy amount of lobbyists in Washington, you know. So you have to that's something else, to keep in mind. It used to be you'd only hear about people getting this type of surgery if they had like Chris Jenner money, you
Yes.
know? And these people, they had like been in, they were adults, they'd been in, the public eye for I don't know how long. And then all of a sudden, guess what? They decided to just have this particular surgery. Nobody really blinked because it's like, if that's what you want, then, you're an adult, go ahead, and do that.
Absolutely. And I do also agree with you 100% in regards to the adults who we see who clearly are very comfortable with what they've done. There
Hmm.
are adults, and then we also see adults who are not. So you can tell, you can almost tell the level of confidence and what they are bringing to this point of view. John Ware Jr. says top down view with feminizing men, masculating women, and making gender ambiguous. It's as if there's a big push to an androgynous world. And we kind of are seeing that
Yes.
in entertainment as well.
Yes. There's
Um,
a
I'm sorry, go
big
ahead.
push. No, because we've talked about this on Toxic Femininity repeatedly, how it comes up. Hollywood, it used to be, we'll roll back. It's probably one of the reasons why Top Gun Maverick is so popular. Back in the 80s, the big deal was very, very masculine men and very feminine women. And that's what we're used to seeing. If you go into, foreign theater, we'll take Europe out of it. We'll say like Nigerian movies, we'll say like Indian cinema, Asian cinema. You can tell who's a woman and you can tell who's a man because those qualities are are brought forth, very masculine, strong men, very strong women, but very feminine, and usually with feminine women playing on their strength of being feminine. But Hollywood has decided femininity is a problem, masculinity is toxic. So that's why they've gone through this thing of just making, masculized women, feminized men. Case in point, that god awful Cinderella reboot on Amazon, a fairy god dude instead of a fairy godmother. It just no. No, I said I'm out.
Well, Scotty R37 says discovering personal identity is such a dramatic age, especially today with so many identities. For lack of a better term on the menu, I don't know where that guidance comes from. And this is exactly what I think Matt Walsh's documentary is also, asking.
Hmm.
How are these opinions and ideas and ideologies formed? Certainly, it wasn't something that happened overnight. There had to be some kind of advantage to having some of these ideas, and we are kind of seeing that.
Hmm.
When I say advantage, to athletes who are getting an unfair advantage, and
Hmm.
to companies that perform these procedures that are making millions and millions of dollars in that. And Joker Voice goes on to say the number of people who became millionaires through the lockdowns.
Yeah, think about it.
Yes,
It's a
yes.
lot of money. And what is it? Like not being able to release the results for 75 years, I believe, in the research that they did.
And
Yeah.
something, Lorena, the other thing that I think is very interesting is I think that through the course of this documentary, it is a discovery event. It's a discovery event in the sense of Matt seeing the significance and the need for getting this information out to the public. But I
Hmm.
also think that I also think it's culturally significant because there are questions that are constantly being challenged. And and another thing that makes it culturally significant to me is how disrespectful uh, many of the interviewers are, let's say, to the I guess maybe to not just to Matt Walsh, but to the
Hmm.
viewer, the person who's watching it, when they use disrespectful language. And I don't mean that they them stuff. I mean calling somebody crazy, or you
Hmm.
know uh, saying what they're just not having enough respect to listen to what the other person is saying, where they walk off the interview,
Hmm.
um, things of that nature. I think that, as we had mentioned before about being challenged and wanting to do that, but,
Right.
I think that they believe that everyone is going to agree with them. What is the fantasy? It is a fantasy that in the course of a day, you
Hmm.
know, that an individual thinks everybody's going to agree with every single thing they have to say. Where did that notion come from? And why is it becoming so pervasive now, do you think?
Let's see. Where do I begin? Um, you know what? I'll actually use software engineering as a point for that. So when I was writing code, it was either your code works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you need to fix it so that it does work. Okay. Just fix what you have to fix, and and that's it. Fast forward to like today. I have my software developers who are old school that are pretty much okay, as long as you can prove that my code doesn't work, okay, I have to go back and fix it. Some of the very junior ones, if I criticize it, you would think that I just called them everything but a child of God. What? Well, it should. I feel that it works. I feel that it should do X,
What?
Y, and Z.
What?
Um, I don't really agree with that. I don't really want to do this assignment. I want something that's more new, avant-garde,
Oh
and
my God.
sexier. And you will have to deal with this, to the point where I had someone say that I made them feel like they didn't know how to do their job. And I'm like, yeah, didn't know how to do their job and didn't want to take the advice of this is what you need to do to fix it. Now in engineering, pretty much it's binary. Either it works or it doesn't. or even if it does work, it may go through circuitous patterns for the fact that it does work. But you have a group of people who feel that their feelings should matter over logic. Now, feelings are neither right or wrong. No one's saying that. There's a saying that says you're entitled to your own feelings, but you're not entitled, to your own facts. And you have now this social atmosphere where people think that their feelings should be facts. That's why you hear things like, well, I know my truth. It's not really that they know what happened and that was true that it happened. It's basically, I believe my version and you should believe my version too. And if you don't believe my version, well, that's a microaggression, you know, or something
I
like
have
that.
heard about the microaggressions
Yeah, it's like
and
it's a
tell me that this isn't going to work or something
microaggression.
like that.
And yeah, there's this thing where we've gotten away from where logical discourse and disagreement, we'll say civil disagreement, was encouraged. Now it's whatever I think my reality is or my truth is. Who are you to tell me that what I think is what I'm feeling is not the truth? It's not about logic, and it's not about logic anymore. Case in point, a case in point, a Juicy Smollett. I keep bringing him up because he's the poster child, for that. Basically, no, that didn't happen. I know my truth. He would keep saying that. But instead of calling out BS for what it is, people just think that you're supposed to accept that. Like I had someone say, oh, well, aren't you going to be like an ally? Like in some companies, it's like when it's Pride Month or whatever, not for nothing, no
And that's
disrespect.
harassment. That is harassment.
Yes, it's just like, oh, well, aren't you going to be an ally? I said, well, number one, they're a colleague, so they're supposed to be an ally. You're supposed to treat everyone with respect. I shouldn't have to put on some button or something like that says, hey, I'm an LGBTQ, ally. No, that's not how it works. If I have reports under me who are LGBTQ, my job is to treat them, with respect and with dignity, and for them to feel like, yes, I'm their ally because they're my direct reports, they're my responsibility. But it shouldn't be this thing of like, well, you have to show this,
You have to
what you
prove it. You have to prove it.
exactly that you have to prove. And it's just like, why?
And that's how I see the pronoun situation. That's how I view the pronoun situation.
Oh, that's something else too. Yeah.
And I'm not going to get too much into it, but that is how I view that.
Hmm.
Scotty R37 says, me, I asked for yellow. Them, I prefer purple. Me, you're fired. Scotty. And hello, Hassoni Parker. Hello to you.
Hello.
Guys, Hassoni Parker is a comic book creator, so please do check out Hassoni Parker's information. I haven't
Nice.
seen you for a while, Hassoni. I hope you are well, and thank you for definitely checking in
Yeah.
for sure. And something, another thing that I noticed, Lorena, about this documentary is that Matt does express and call it madness infecting a society. And I think it's very interesting that he chose those words. And I think
Hmm.
that from a certain point of view, it can be looked at from like that. For me, I would say I would classify it, and Matt, if you ever see this, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just, like how I viewed your documentary. I just have to be careful because I don't want to give viewers and anyone the wrong information about what this documentary is. Guys, just go ahead and watch the documentary, and you can make your own decisions and conclusions after seeing it. But in the
Hmm.
documentary, Matt says madness is infecting a society; that it's madness. And for me, I didn't view it as madness. I viewed it as misinformation and the right to be presented with full disclosure.
Hmm.
And in addition to being presented with full disclosure, you would have to have the right to ask questions, even if you have different points of view.
Hmm.
And also having respect for people who whose choice is either way, one way or the other, without vilification for focusing on facts. And so, I think that we have gotten a lot of misinformation regarding these procedures and people's honest feelings about it. I almost got the impression that some people were afraid to say how they were honestly feeling. And
Hmm.
that kind of saddened me because I wanted to hear those other voices. I wanted to hear what they had to say, but they were not able to express themselves. So I think that was
Hmm.
something that there might be some fear from certain populations
Mhm.
to they may not be able to tell us how they really feel for different reasons. And I don't think it's
Mhm.
fear because they're afraid of us. I
Mhm.
think that there may not it could be an issue of communication as well. But for the general public, it seems like there's so much misinformation, Lorena. I wonder where anybody could turn to if they had to confront this situation. I mean, it is something that, um, upon reflection, is very serious and affects the health of all of us. What do you think, Lorena?
With respect of just people in general talking about this issue, or
Yes, yeah, whatever you.
that's it's a tough thing, because I know sometimes, like, if I'm on Twitter, I mean, I've seen this happen to other people, not me, but if they comment like on an issue having to do, a LGBTQ issue, just, a factual comment, "Oh, you're homophobic." It's just like, no, I just made a comment, and I've seen this happen. Well, you will get people who will just pile on, to that, and hardly give the person a chance to talk. So sometimes people are just like, why should I just engage in that conversation? You're just going to call me, an istinophobe or whatever. But on the flip side, you could have someone who is LGBTQ, like several people that I know, who were just like, we are not down with doing this to, small children. They're just like, I didn't, I had ideas that I might be gay, but I didn't really seriously entertain that until I was like past 18 and I was mature enough to handle that particular type of relationship. That's kind of like the stories that they tell. But if they voice that, you have the activists. I call them the Skittles Nation, because there's a difference between LGBTQ, who are just like, I just want to be accepted for who I am. I just want to live my life. I'm not trying to demonize, other people, as opposed to the activist Skittles Nation, who just reads about everything, to the point where if there's people in their community who they do believe that this shouldn't be marketed to kids, they're vilified. So it's like I can't even speak out, in my own community. So that's kind of like the flip side. But we have this atmosphere in this country, a lot of it fueled by social media. That's why a lot of times it's good to like unplug from unplug from social media.
Mhm.
It gives us this atmosphere of just like, if you say, you're LGBTQ, if you say you're transgender, people are going to hate you. And that's not necessarily, that's not the case, not necessarily the case, but that's the atmosphere that is, that's festered by social media. And it's really a shame, and it short circuits people from talking to each other. Like, I saw someone put on Twitter, maybe like last year or so, where they were just like, we're an LGBTQ couple, are we going to be safe traveling in the South? And I'm just like, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me, right? But they were actually very, very serious. But thankfully, there were people who were just like, no, take your trip, have fun.
Yeah, and you make a good point about that. I think that uh, Lugnut Six says, if I had to label myself romantic, thoughtful, nice, understanding, and creative, sounds great. Those are
Hmm.
definitely. And Charlie the Unicorn says, the truth is weaponized, and Yeah, it is too bad that, as you said, Lorena, where they're not sharing. Like pulling back um, for a number of reasons, and this might be the time where we need them to speak up the most, and not trying to change our opinions about anything, but sharing how they feel. So I think that
Mhm.
the reality that's been presented for them is an unsustainable reality. The
Mhm.
majority of the population is not going to jump on and agree to what I've been seeing and what has been requested of them, and they
Mhm.
don't have to. But if we're going to have this group of people in our society, which we do, and we respect them and accept them, I'm
Right.
concerned about, let's say 5 or 10 years down the line, when they don't have a platform that is legitimately representing them in a way that benefits them, because I don't think the representation that some of these groups have is benefiting them in a positive way.
No.
So it's something to be concerned about. And I too, Lorena, know one or two people who have transitioned. They're adults, and I have heard a lot of very difficult, comments and experiences from them that they don't share with everyone. And then when you realize the level of what was involved to get to where they are,
Mhm.
um, they're incredibly strong people. And I'm really concerned the idea of a child even having to approach that or deal with that.
Right.
It to me, it is something that I think would not be ideal for someone under a certain age. So,
Mhm.
um, the other final thing I wanted to talk to you about, Lorena, and of course, if there's something else you want to say, I didn't say this, but you can, if there's
Oh,
something you
no.
absolutely want to say, you should just go ahead and say it. But there is something else that I thought was very interesting,
Mhm.
and it was at the end. Well, first of all, I did want to say that I want Matt Walsh to do the "What Is a Man" version of this. Um,
Agreed. Yeah.
And of course,
Agreed.
as we mentioned, Matt Walsh does have a book that is also called "What Is a Woman," and apparently he goes more in depth. And it's probably something great to have on your bookcase, everybody. Um,
I'll have to look into that. I did not know he had a book too.
yes, it is available
Okay.
on Amazon,
Okay.
everyone. So please do check out Matt Walsh's book, "What Is a Woman." The other thing that I was going to say, and this is really the last comment that I have, at least from what was on my mind after watching this, had to do with our latest Supreme Court justice. And as you know, she was asked a million questions. God bless this woman, but
Mhm.
the way that she behaves shows you that you can ask her anything, and she's expecting contradictory comments. She's expecting that. She's a Supreme Court justice. This is what they do all day long, debating different ideas. And I
Mhm.
loved that Matt chose this to be the last point, because she was very clear. She was asked a question about this topic, and her words were, there may be some court cases that make these decisions.
Mhm.
And I thought that was very interesting, because I have a feeling that a lot of this is going to have to be debated in the Supreme Court. A lot of it is going
Absolutely.
to have to go to
Abs
that level.
Absolutely. And I hadn't heard that clip before.
Mhm.
So when she was talking about that with the court cases, I'm like, okay, that does make sense because you have, so many of these cases coming up. People who, like, for example, the one sprinter having to compete with having to compete with transgender women. One video I believe that Matt showed in his documentary, and I hope I'm saying this right because I think is what's happened, is that there was a spa, like a day spa, and there were women in a day spa. And some dude walked up in there because he identified as a woman, and she's just like, no, I don't want to be, around that. I shouldn't have to be subjected to that. My right to privacy should be protected, you know, not, you know, invaded because you decide you want to identify as, you know, as a woman. So there's like cases, there's going to be cases like that. So there's going to be several cases probably coming through the Supreme Court, because you have some state courts who do not want to touch some of these, and they just kick it up to the Supreme Court. So, yeah, that was interesting to hear. It's going to be very interesting seeing that debated, because we've seen individual states, like, for example, I believe here in the state of Florida, they also passed, you know, a bill about allowing biological men in biological boys and girls sports. Like, no, we're not gonna have that. Maybe challenged, then goes up to, you know, then goes up to the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that was maybe one of the best parts of the documentary for me, is
Mm-hmm.
because um, I think that, you know, if one of the smartest women in the judicial system, which she is,
Mm-hmm.
um, and, you know, for argument's sake, remember, just because somebody is a certain affiliation or a certain background does not mean that you're going to agree with everything they have to say. In fact, you should expect to disagree, especially if you're on the court system where they're debating
Mm-hmm.
everything
Yes.
that happens on a day-to-day basis. You know, the questions they were asking her, that was like a walk in the park for her. You know, I know they felt they were heavy hitting on her. I'm like, no, it's not if you are
It's
a
usually
judge.
Congress trying to, you know, posture and all of that. And whenever I think about the Supreme Court, one of the things that I like to keep in mind is that Justice Antonin Scalia, who is conservative, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is liberal, they were very good friends,
Yes. Yes.
you
And
know,
I
for
think
years.
you make such a good point of that. Tom Jr. Jackson has this post about anger and rage towards transgender people, and we are seeing that, and that does need to stop. But we also
Mm,
are in a situation in Crossroads where we're not finding that everyone is being treated in a respectful and an equal manner. And so until we get to that
mhm,
point, and this has not been an easy situation, I think, as demonstrated in this documentary, for anyone to
mhm,
completely understand. I think a lot of this is going to be decided in the courts, and a lot of it will go one way or the others at certain
mhm,
points in time. So we're going to see a lot of this. I think, for me, Lorena, this documentary was incredibly informative, and I think if we can get things like this, because we don't have all the newspapers we used to have, where you would get reports about different things going on. We don't have any
mhm,
of that right
mhm,
now. I don't know whether the Daily Wire is only on YouTube, but let's just say it's also on the internet and internet reporting group.
mhm.
Right now, when we were growing up, there used to be hundreds of newspapers that would report on stuff like this, and each
Oh
newspaper
yeah.
would give you a different point of view of the same story. And
Mhm,
you could say, well, I agree more with the New York Times version versus the
mhm,
Boston Times. You know, there would be all different kinds of stories treated differently depending upon who wrote it and what they wanted to focus on. And we don't
mhm,
really get that anymore. So this is the forum that we have to even discuss this.
mhm,
We need to see more documentaries like this and have these discussions, and not walk away
mhm.
when it becomes uncomfortable.
Yeah, and again, people talking, you know, at each other instead of to each other. And I do like how balanced this documentary was, because Matt basically let the people he interviewed speak in their own words, whether they agreed with them, disagreed with them, wanted to walk off, you know, at least he put that forum out there so you could hear what they were saying. Like, case in point, with the gender studies person, you know, talking, and it got to the point where he was just like, I feel that you're being, you know, very aggressive, very, you know, very disrespectful. That wasn't right or wrong. That's kind of, you know, how he felt. Maybe he didn't like that direct line of questioning. Some people don't like a direct line of questioning. They kind of like to, you know, go roundabout, you know, before they land. Some people feel that they're going to be judged by giving, you know, by giving their opinion. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not always the case, but sometimes that's the perception, Because when you have this culture of fear out there, and it's exactly what I'll say, you'll have like fear from those who are transgender who feel like I want to be accepted for who I am, but I'm being told that everyone who's not transgender hates me. Then obviously you're going to have some feel some type of way about that, and definitely be on the defensive. Like some people, for some reason I don't understand, I guess it's because it's the loudest people out there, some of them think that, oh, conservatives are all bigots and they're homophobic, and it's just like, no, that's not the case either. So I agree. We really do need more documentaries like this that puts the information out there, and the only objective is the truth, which is the best way to put it out there. And that's what documentaries used to be. They
Mhm.
just gave you the information, gave you different points of view of interpreting that information, and at the end left it up to you to make the decision for what to take from it.
Absolutely. And as I said, I would describe this documentary as culturally significant. Even though Matt Walsh does get frustrated, I didn't necessarily think he took one view or another. He was asking a lot of questions, and he became frustrated when he couldn't do his reasoning, which was sweet of him to do that. But honestly, it may not have necessarily been needed in this documentary. I know he wanted to kind of break the ice a little bit. He wanted to
Mhm.
see how he could reason with someone. But
Mhm.
for me, I think it was just an example of, sometimes you can speak to somebody who has an opposing view and you're not going to be able to convince them of your view. It's just, you have to just accept that they have an
Yeah, we
opposing
just
view.
have to
And
agree to disagree and just go on with it.
yes, yes. And Scotty R37 says, I treat every person that I encounter with everyone, encounter I have with everyone with respect, until I don't want to hang out with them anymore. Also, I like that Matt Walsh asked the question. I know my answer. Okay. And thank you for sharing that view with us, Scotty. And we also have Lugnut6, who says, me and my mother, God rest her soul, along with my extended family, have broken bread with my LGBTQ folks at Pride celebrations. And I will say this, they are very nice folks. They are very nice folks, guys. And I think this might be a turning point for many of them, but we also don't want to see them making poor public health decisions for them. Let's let them have the right information so they can make
Mhm.
the best decisions for themselves and they
Right,
stay healthy. There's
right.
no point in somebody having a surgery that perhaps if they had had a few years later or under a different circumstance might have been better for them.
Mhm.
you know
Exactly.
we certain this documentary is not a transphobic documentary. It's about
No.
wanting the best for the people in the community who want to have
Mhm.
operations like this. We want the
Exactly.
best for our trans population.
Mhm.
We don't want them hurt. We don't want them in pain. We don't want any of that stuff. We want them to get the best care they can. And I
Mhm.
think, that also shows kind of a social responsibility. You do not have to form an opinion about this, but that's what I got from this documentary. They want people to make the best informed decisions.
Absolutely, to have the correct information that you need, know who is behind the curtain profiting off of this, as well, and also remembering to keep in mind as well, because that whole question, what is a woman? Also taking care that, femininity isn't demonized. It's not used as a costume, so to speak. Um, Biological woman is just as much a valued human being as someone who is transgender. And I think that's another thing that's kind of been lost, in this. You'll have some people who will, like, say, call the likes of like J.K. Rowling a turf, trans exclusional radical feminist. That's not always the case. Speaking up for biological women doesn't mean dehumanizing you. And that's another thing, to keep in mind. And it's a shame. Standing up for, a woman's right to exist doesn't trump your right to exist, and it doesn't, it shouldn't threaten you at the same time, you know.
Absolutely. Jared Snyder says, "Thank you for this conversation. My concern is still about how hard and painful life can be for children who find themselves outside of the norms." And they did talk about that in this video
Mhm.
quite a bit. And I'm
Yes.
so glad that he addressed that, that we still do have children out there who are searching for answers and don't have
Mhm.
those answers. And so this is
Exactly.
something that, across the board should be addressed. Do I think that a kid going on the internet searching for an answer is bad? I do. I think they should go to their parents if they can, or to a professional, who has their best interests in heart. I don't think that going on the internet necessarily is going to give them the results they need or the care that they need. I think it can give you guidance, but perhaps other than guidance or point you to a direction or a phone number,
Mhm.
they're going to need a little bit more help than a discussion room chat. So that is something to think about. Care is more involved than that. It
Mhm.
involves working with a professional on a regular basis and following up on
Absolutely.
that. So, that's something that should be looked at realistically um, going forward. Lorena, do you have any other thoughts about the documentary or anything else you want to share that was brought up in this documentary?
Um, no, I think it was done really well. It's something that has not been out there that really does, need to be out there. The title is intentionally provocative yet simplistic, because when it boils down to, to brass tacks, it's basically the whole conversation around what is sex, what is gender, and also finding out who is behind this cottage industry of pushing this type of transitional surgery on children, not necessarily adults. I mean, they talk to the adults to show, again, what can happen should you decide to do this, what the risks are, that are involved. Overall, it's an extremely good documentary. I think it's going to do very, very well. I hope he does one called, "What is a Man?" and they get and they start talking about that particular subject. I think that would be really really cool. But yeah, overall, it was a great documentary. And I enjoyed watching it, enjoyed reviewing it. So I definitely would suggest watching this documentary. There were some talking heads out there calling it transphobic. I think you saw the Rolling Stone really does need to just stick to freaking old music. They were actually more interesting then. But usually the ones that are talking about this documentary being transphobic either didn't watch or didn't truly understand what they were looking at and just went into it with an agenda, because frankly there is no agenda in here. Well, I'll take that back. The only agenda is the truth. That's it. And maybe that's just the thing that's ultimately so threatening to people, to find out what the actual truth is when it comes
or
to this.
or access, having that access that
Mm,
seems to not be available to everyone? Why does
exactly.
it feel like we're not getting all of the information for
Hmm.
something that is so significant, something so serious?
Right.
We care about the welfare of the people in our earth and community.
Hmm.
It feels like that whole group, that the transgender group, their care is not as important, or they're not getting the resources they need to make decisions that are right for them. Um, and you mentioned something about how these surgeries are benefiting individuals, and they did show a clip of that film that's somewhat controversial, Cuties on Netflix. And I had never
Yes.
watched the film, Lorraine. I never watched it. So seeing that clip, I was just like, I wanted to take my eyes out after I saw that, because I didn't want to see that. And I think it was interesting
I
that Matt chose to insert that in there. I get the impression that he is implying that the children are being exploited as well.
Yes,
Um, and it's unfortunate that that is happening. But what I was going to say is that for anybody who's watching this, I agree with you. It's not a transphobic documentary. Matt wants you to have all the information and make the best decisions.
exactly.
I think that if he never said there was anything wrong with trans people, he did voice concerns about children, surgery on children, which everyone has concerns with. There isn't anyone out there who doesn't have concerns about that going forward. So I think that it was a responsible documentary,
Very.
and I'm not going to say it was. I think it was a necessary view. I think it was something that people need to watch. Um,
Agreed.
so so that you can get a better understanding. Does this have every bit of information that you need to know about this? No, it doesn't. But it's informing you that there's so much more to learn, and in order for everyone to benefit, that community needs to get the right care, and I don't think they are getting it. So yeah. Well, Lorena, thank you for joining me today on this discussion of this incredible documentary, What is a Woman? And Lorena, where can people find you?
Well, folks, you can find me in several places. You can find me over on Twitter, where I run my mouth a lot over there with pop culture, politics, all kinds of subjects. You can also find me on Instagram, and of course, you can find me on YouTube. Oh, and also on Twitch. I'm getting that, getting that up and running. Tomorrow, actually at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, the Dark Council will be on the Drunk 3PO Basement channel. So
Ooh.
I will be on that show as well. So come out there and check that out. Thursday, of course, is Toxic Male Appreciation show over on Twitch, which I do with her over there. And we're going to be talking Clint and Scott Eastwood for like our Father's
Yes.
Day, one of our Father's Day specials actually. So we're going to be talking about them. Let's see, Thursday, Friday. Yeah, Friday I'm actually taking off, and Saturday I'm going to be doing a theme park stream from Universal Orlando. So we're going to be doing some 80s movies, reminiscing, so to speak, and a ride the ET ride, and going to check out the amazing 80s movie tribute store, which has replicas of Elliot's room from ET. They've got,
Yes.
Jaws, like a replica of a Cape Cod boat, shack. We have that there. And also Back to the Future as well. So it's going to be a fun stream. So looking forward to that. Also, Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I will be doing a watch party of Dances with Smurfs, better known as Avatar. I have not freaking seen this movie,
I can't
so
believe you haven't seen it
I
yet.
haven't seen it. I was just like, whatever, everybody, whatever. Dances with Smurfs. I'm not in a rush to see it, but there is a World of Pandora at the Animal Kingdom at Walt Disney World, and it is absolutely amazing. So I'm gonna
Oh,
check out the movie, see what the fuss is about.
yeah, that sounds amazing. I didn't know that there was a world of Pandora there. I
Yes.
definitely
Mhm.
have to check that out when I go down there. Guys, you can always find me on Sundays at 10:30 a.m. on my channel here, Positive Fandom, on my Sunday
Mhm.
brunch show. So definitely check that out live where we do all the parlay in the fandom. And of course, Monday nights I stream with Lorena and Nina on Toxic Femmes at 8 p.m. Eastern. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, you can find me sometimes on the 1/6 Scale Man Network on Say What or Uncivilized Scoundrels. Sometimes, actually, every Thursday at 5 p.m. on Lorena's Twitch channel, you can find me on our show, Toxic Male Appreciation. As Lorena mentioned, we're going to be doing a show on Clint Eastwood and his son. So that's going to be
Mhm.
fantastic, guys.
Yes.
Yes, Friday you can find me on Midnight's Edge in the morning at 12 p.m. with Tom Connors and Andre. And on Fridays or Saturday, you can find me on the PGS, the Post Geek Singularity channel, streaming with Robert Meyer Burnett, talking about all the fandom as well, guys. It's such a pleasure to have all of you in the chat tonight. We certainly do appreciate you all being here with us for this very important discussion. And
Mhm.
for all of you out there, wherever you are in the galaxy, certainly do remember to please be kind, guys. Take care.